Hi. Well, it's quiet in my office today while most everyone's out voting. I wanted to discuss something that I've been wanting to talk about or write about for a while. Been a little nervous to offend any of my colleagues who are all very hardworking, but I think it's something that people should think about and know a little bit more about. And that's about choosing your accountant. And this is not just for U.S. accounting. This is, would apply to most professionals, but specifically for U.S. taxes is the main thing I'm going to talk about. And also, I want to touch on a few of the things that you should be keeping in mind to be telling your accountant. And I think those things are really connected. So first of all, choosing your accountant. Generally, there is really very generally, not always directly, there's a connection, as you may have guessed, between the fees that you should expect to pay and the service you're getting and the experience of your accountant. There's always exceptions. You're always going to find somebody who's very experienced or very nice to work with, who is giving you a better deal than the next guy. But in general, just like with so many other things, you may expect that you get what you pay for. So keep that in mind with whatever else I say might be important to you. You always may need to weigh what you want in an accountant against your budget and your needs. So first of all, let's talk about having an accountant at all versus not having an accountant. So first of all, you need to look at your personal situation. That said, I often say that most people either significantly overestimate or significantly underestimate the difficulty of their situation. You might not be the best judge, but generally speaking, if you have only wages, you're not married, you have no children, and especially if you live in the U.S., and you don't have a budget for an accountant, these are places where if you're doing your own taxes, even if you make a mistake, the risks are lower that you're messing up big time. So with anything, that's what you're weighing. Whether you're doing that consciously, when you get an accountant, you're weighing the cost of the accountant versus the risk you mess up and what the fees and what the cost of that is going to be, and number two, your own time. So a lot of people that are doing their own taxes because they really like to, even though they're making lots of money per hour, they really love doing their own taxes. But even then, I see some ridiculous mistakes. So if your situation is not super simple, and when I say super simple, I'm talking but mostly people in the U.S. just getting a W-2, please consider paying for an accountant. But obviously there's any range of what situations you may have. If you are self-employed, those are really good reasons to have an accountant. If you don't live in the U.S., that automatically complicates your situation, even if everything else is simple. So if you live outside the U.S. and you have children who are U.S. citizens, please get an accountant, please. You are likely eligible for refunds. I did another video a couple weeks ago about getting refunds, so you can listen to that. But once you're looking about getting refunds, the IRS is likely to look at your tax return a little more carefully, and there are more things to track and pay attention to and record than if you're not getting refunds. So if you have U.S. citizen children, I think it's really worthwhile to find an accountant. So let's say you've decided you're going to get an accountant. How do you choose? So most people are asking their friends, probably. I mean, I think most of my clients have found me on Facebook, and that's because other clients or my friends have recommended me, and I'm really grateful for that. But you still need to think who is good for you. So you need to speak with them. Different accountants have different ways of doing things. Personally, I'm usually talking to each person for about 15 minutes before I give them an official price quote. Other accountants have very flat rates. I don't. I take a more holistic approach to it, and anybody who's my client for taxes is my client through the whole year. I don't usually charge more for little bits of consulting and questions throughout the year, so I try to look at the whole situation, and that's whatever price I give them is the price to have them be my client for the year. So feel that out. See what works for you and what price structure you're comfortable with. Other accountants might give you an estimate, but then they look at how many hours they put in and then they bill you for that. So if that makes you uncomfortable, think about that before you start. There is a bit of a range of how people give fee quotes. I would say generally you're talking about either flat fee quote, like everybody's charging the same amount for a 1040, which is pretty rare, or for specific forms, you're talking about you get a fee quote, and then that fee quote is very likely to stay the same each year or go up just a little bit, usually if your situation doesn't change. And then you have ones that are more hourly where they give you an estimate. So I had a client a couple of years ago who I had given her a fee quote. She signed the engagement letter, and then she came back to me and she had a lot of questions about how exactly I come up with that fee. And my answers weren't really good enough for her, and I told her, if you're not comfortable, she had actually gotten a quote from somebody else in the meantime, actually. And I told her, if you're not comfortable with this, now is a great time. We haven't done anything yet. And your relationship with your accountant should be long-term. So don't just find the person who's cheapest this year. Find the person who you want to work with long-term. I could see that maybe we weren't a match, and even though she had signed an engagement letter with me, now is a really good time to get out. So I told her, and I know this is a little unorthodox, but I asked her, hey, do you mind if I ask who else you talked to? And it turned out she spoke with another, someone who happens to be a friend of mine, but another professional accountant, who I said, that's great, she does a good job, and so if you want to work with her, go for it. And as far as I know, they're still happy to this day. Excuse me. So, as I mentioned, you need to find somebody who you're going to be comfortable working with long term. You need to find someone who you can trust. So if you're going to spend a little more money, to get somebody, you have to have an accountant you can trust. Otherwise, it's going to stress you out, and that's not good. That said, just because you need to trust your accountant doesn't mean you shouldn't be reviewing your own tax returns. It is absolutely important. You need an accountant who's going to send you the full tax return, give you time to review the whole thing, and be willing to answer your questions. And depending on what level you want to review it, you should try to find an accountant who is on board with that. So if you're the kind of person who wants your accountant to go through every line of your tax return, you might want to let the accountant know up front and see what their response is to that. If you're the kind of person who says, I don't want to look at my tax return, I trust you, can you even sign it for me? Bring that up. That's not my style. It's really important to me that clients at least have a basic understanding of what we're telling the IRS. I don't want to tell the IRS anything that they don't know is the IRS knows. So I do generally go over the tax returns with them, at least in general, and more detailed if they want to. But I'm always available for questions, and I'm not saying these things to try to get clients. I promise, don't call me. I really just want you to think about these things when you are finding an accountant who doesn't need to be me. I'm busy enough. These are just things that are meaningful to me. So you want to find an accountant who you are comfortable asking questions to, and this is so important. If you are working with an accountant who you think makes you feel stupid, or is too busy, or doesn't answer your calls, I'm not saying you should fire them, if they're good in all other aspects, or, their fees are great. Obviously, you have to weigh everything, but I think it is so important to have an accountant who not only is willing to answer your questions, but you are comfortable contacting them. I personally would rather have a client ask me 10 irrelevant questions rather than not ask me something that is important. And part of the reason that I really wanted to make this video is because I recently had a situation where somebody opened an Israeli, a client, an American client living in Israel, had opened an Israeli corporation and hadn't asked me first. And she thought that that was, from what she had heard from her friends or from Facebook, she thought that was the best way to go. And it's probably going to cost her a couple $1,000s more than if she hadn't done that, and if there was another way to do it that could have saved her a lot of money, and she didn't ask me. And I feel terrible that she didn't understand that I am her accountant and she should ask. So I'm not going to be mad if I see my clients asking questions on Facebook, but I think my personal feeling is that you should be asking your accountant first. People don't always know what kinds of questions are relevant, but I think it's worth a try. And if you're not sure, ask your accountant what they do. I'm not going to charge unless it's something complicated, and I'll tell people up front. I'm not going to have a client call me and then they'll see a bill for that time. That's not going to happen, at least by me. Other accountants might do that, but maybe that's okay with you. Maybe that system is okay with you, that they charge you by hour for however many hours you use them during the year or during the month. So find a situation that is good for you, but I think it is so important that you have a relationship with your accountant, that you can ask them questions as they come up, not just that you have a tax preparer who you go to once a year. There's a place for that, and if that's your budget, okay. But really, if you can, you should feel comfortable asking your accountant these things. The other thing you want to think about is, what is your accountant's specialty? So for example, my specialty is working with individuals, doing individual taxes with an international element. Most of my clients are based in Israel. If someone were to call me from a different country, I might say, Israel's really my specialty. I know more about the Israel tax treaty and a few other countries' tax treaties, I have clients in a few other countries. But yours is not my specialty, so why don't you first look for someone local? Why don't you first see if there's already a U.S. accountant who knows these other treaties that you might get a better deal. And one of the reasons that's important is not just because they're going to have more information, but it's going to affect your fee quote. So if someone calls me up and says, oh, I have such a complicated situation, I earn money from an Israeli employer, and I'm thinking, well, that's like the simplest thing I deal with. So that's, for me, going to be not a really expensive fee quote, because that's what I'm dealing with every day. To get a single wage statement and have really nothing else going on is really simple. And that's, most accountants in Israel that's going to be a simple situation. So start locally. If you live in Israel, you have many, many wonderful choices for Israeli accountants, for U.S. accountants in Israel, who can help you and who really know this stuff. If you are using a U.S. accountant who is based in the U.S., please reconsider. There are a small handful of U.S. accountants in the U.S. who understand international accounting. Not really a small handful, but a small percentage. And the ones that do are usually charging a significant amount more money than any U.S. accountant in Israel, because the U.S. accountants in Israel, besides the fact that the living wage is just on average less here, this is average for them. There's more competition here. This is the regular thing we're doing. It's not unique. But if you were to go to an accountant in New York, besides that you're paying the New York cost of living, it's a more of a specialty in the U.S. So anybody who's specializing in international taxation, who's living in the U.S., this is a real specialty, and you're going to pay a premium. If you're using someone who isn't a specialist, they're probably making a lot of mistakes. And I see an amazing range of mistakes. I could write a book on all of the mistakes that U.S.-based accountants make because they don't understand all the complexities and all the things that are so different for Americans living abroad. So start locally. So I want to go into a little bit about what you should ask your accountant and tell your accountant. So asking your accountant. It doesn't hurt to ask your accountant before you open or close a bank account if you're living abroad. These are pretty small things, and I think there's probably a lot of accountants that would think this is, they don't want you to tell them every time you open or close a bank account. I don't mind. What am I going to tell you? I'm going to tell you hey, before you close that account, get the highest balance that you had during the year in that account, because it's really a pain to do once you close the account. I might tell you to make sure that you have all your year-end statements, or maybe get a statement, the last statement right before you empty the account. Make sure you have all the documentation you need, because it's really a pain once you close the account. Let's say you're going to join an account with your husband who is not a U.S. citizen. I'd be happy to chat with you about that. There's, in general, I don't think people should revolve their lives around taxes, but there are some little things you can do and keep in mind, and keep in mind before you do things. And I'm really, really happy to have my clients do that. And even people who aren't my clients, if you don't have a U.S. accountant, you can send me a message. I don't mind. I'm happy to stop people from doing stupid stuff. What's something stupid? Something stupid might be you put your name as the joint owner on your spouse's account. Your spouse is not a U.S. citizen, and your spouse is holding all these investments in Israel, foreign mutual funds, things like that. It's going to make a huge mess. It's going to cost you lots more in accounting, potential penalties. It's a mess, and something you might not think about. Mazal tov, you got married, that's great. Don't just start combining all your accounts. Speak with somebody. So again, a lot of these things are not specifically accounting things, but when you have a good relationship with your accountant, there are things that you can talk about. And I love talking to my clients, at least once a year. I really do like to catch up. I like to see what they're expecting the next year. And we can talk about these things and make sure we're planning appropriately. You have a baby. That's one of my favorite parts of my job, is I get to know who is expecting and who just had a baby. I love when people tell me that. It's wonderful. It's exciting. I'm friends with a lot of my clients on Facebook, so the truth is, this is my little secret. Someone posts that they had a baby on Facebook, I'm likely to also make a note of that in their tax file. So I kind of combine those two things. If you're trying to have a baby, you don't really need to tell your accountant that. A bunch of people do. That's lovely. Good luck. I'm happy for you. You're happy to, for me, feel free to tell me anything about your personal life, really, but that's just me. You don't really need to tell your accountant that you're trying to conceive. That's not really necessary. If you're expecting an inheritance, things like that are things that might not have immediate tax consequences, but it doesn't hurt to give your accountant a heads up, because there's other things that could be involved. Maybe you're inheriting an IRA, and maybe they need to plan for these things. So personally, I'd rather have too much information. I'd rather you tell me. I'd rather you be in touch, and that gives me an idea, a chance to think about things and warn you about things. So speak with your accountant. If that's important to you, do that. On the other hand, I might be too personal for some people. There are other people who really would prefer I mind my own business. I just take whatever numbers they give me, and I don't think about whether they make sense or not. So if you really just want your accountant to not really try too hard to be adding up the numbers, and really just quickly take whatever numbers you give them, find that. It's not me. One example of that is I might be looking at your wage statement and comparing it to your pension statement, and make sure that those numbers make sense. And it's not uncommon for me to call somebody up and say, hey, according to your wage statement, your employer was supposed to be making all these contributions to your pension, but your pension isn't getting them. Nothing is showing up in your pension, or that pension doesn't exist, and yet your employer probably owes you a lot of money. So I like doing that. I like making sure things add up. I like helping my clients where they can, where I can. But you need to find the person that's right for you. So I think that wraps up most of what I've really been wanting to say for a long time. Bottom line is, if you're in Israel, you probably should be using an accountant in Israel. You should be comfortable speaking with your accountant. The other thing I wanted to mention is, don't compare fees with your friends. It's not worth it. As I said before, most people significantly over or significantly underestimate the complexity. They don't know what they have, and even if they do, they might not be telling you everything. I see people comparing fees on Facebook, and they have no understanding of how the fees work. If you want to understand your fees better, you can ask your accountant, but comparing fees with your friends is kind of worthless. Feel free to compare service. If you're saying, hey, my accountant's never answering my emails, is that normal? Well, it might be normal, but it might not be good. Hey, my accountant got really grumpy when I called them on their mobile phone at 9:30 at night. Yeah, that's normal. Don't expect that. So find the accountant that's good for you. Feel free to ask your friends what's good for them, but what's good for your friends might not be good for you. And I get that all the time because so many, I'm really grateful for happy clients, but just because somebody's friend is happy with my service does not mean my service is right for them for a number of reasons. So good luck. Now is a great time. If you don't already have an accountant, please find one. Don't message me. I'm busy. Find somebody else, unless you're my client already. If I did your taxes last year, I'm planning to do them again. If you have not yet called me, this year's not really a good time. But thank God I have lots of continuing clients who I will be busy dealing with and taking care of all year long. And get on that quick. I'm just looking at the date on my clock. It is March 2nd right now. Most accountants are filing extensions for the 2019 tax filing between now and April 15th, most of them. You do have a little longer, but really you should find someone as soon as possible. If you're not up to date on your taxes, get on that so fast, because in Israel, we're not super, super, super busy yet, most of us. We're not like freaking out busy yet. In the US, this is a super pressured time for them for another month and a half. But for us, it's not yet. So if you do have catching up to do, you do have taxes that are not for 2019, now is a great time to get those taken care of by most accountants. They're much more likely to have capacity to do that now, and then maybe again at the end of December or next January. So now is the time to speak with an accountant. Thanks for watching.